So, how long was I sat petrified? Long enough for Olaphis to rise, fall, and fade away, evidently.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Dark Souls Lore. As with the last episode, we'll continue to focus on Dark Souls 2 today, and we'll be talking about my definite favourite new NPC in Dark Souls 2. Although I say new, he's been around in some form or another for quite some time. He had a presence in Demon Souls way back in 2009, and he played an important role in Dark Souls as our favourite toothy serpent, and now he's back. I am of course talking about the voice actor, Peter Marinka. He was King Allant in Demon Souls, Engi, Frampt and Karth in Dark Souls, and actually I first knew him as Lee Scoresby from an adaptation of Northern Lights, but his best character, in my opinion, is the one we'll be talking about today, the powerful sorcerer, Straid, more formally known as Straid of Olaphis. But what about his name, Straid? Is there anything we can learn from that? Well, as far as I'm aware, Straid is not an actual name, at least in the real world, and the only remotely relevant information I could find is a village in Northern Ireland with the same name, which in turn supposedly comes from the Irish word Straid, which I have no idea how to pronounce. A little more research though tells us that it apparently translates into street. If anyone speaks Irish, well, let me know how badly I butchered that word. Either way, I don't think there's much relevance there without stretching for a connection. But who is Straid? Well, as far as gameplay mechanics go, he's a merchant who serves the role of selling us several spells, and the more important role of boss soul vendor, so to speak. Using his mastery of the magics, he can transform powerful souls into useful spells or items. He also gives us useful information concerning pyromancy, not to mention the location we find him in, the Lost Bastille. He tells us that he was turned to stone, and implies that they thought him a threat due to his immense power, and tricked him into the Bastille. Indeed, when we find him he's petrified. Petrified as he was in the midst of escaping his cell from within. He is perhaps one of the oldest characters in the game, with the exception of Shalquoir. He is almost certainly older than King Vendrick, for example, but is he undead? His dialogue tells us that even though the Bastille was at first for the undead, they then began to impound anyone found undesirable, including himself. And the fact that he constantly refers to us as a cursed one hints to me that he's not undead. But I'm sure you knew all that, so how about I tell you something you might not know? Do you remember my very first lore video on Dark Souls 2, the preview I did during the network test? The description of Straid's equipment has changed since then, but just have a listen to this. Robe worn by the great sorcerer Straid. Straid was a sworn brother-in-arms of the ancient king of Old Olaphis. Together they slew the ancient dragon and tasted omniscience. However, even the renowned wisdom of Olaphis was not enough to control the peculiar magic birthed by his arts. Interesting, no? The ancient king of Old Olaphis. Surely that's not Vendrick. So was it perhaps instead the Iron King? Or someone else entirely? And why was this removed and changed in the final release? Did they just change their mind on that detail? Or did they think it was no longer relevant? Or are they perhaps saving it for something in the future? And what implications could that possibly have? Straid and the king slew the ancient dragon and tasted omniscience. What happens when we slay the ancient dragon? Presumably we would obtain the Ashen Mistar, had we not already obtained it for free through dialogue. More importantly, if that had remained in game, what would the ancient dragon's presence mean? Would it confirm that he's a fake, or would it mean that the legends concerning Straid and the king slaying the dragon were instead a myth? That would be rather familiar to a certain plot point in the game Dragon's Dogma, wherein the Duke of Grand Soren is renowned as the Dragon Slayer, but at the end of the game you find out that he didn't actually slay the dragon at all. He just made a bargain with it. But maybe it also means that the ancient dragon was reborn. And if nothing else, that would give us another hint as to why Straid was locked away. Not enough to control the peculiar magic birthed by his arts. And what peculiar magic was that? Well, Straid has created a number of spells that we know of, including Lingering Flame, one of the pyromancies devised by Straid, the great mage of ancient Olaphis. Release a static fireball that explodes when foes draw near. Straid was an awfully gifted mage, well versed in both sorceries and pyromancies. But his curious temperament never allowed him to settle down in one place for very long. And then there's Flame Swathe, one of the pyromancies devised by Straid, the great mage of ancient Olaphis. Great flames envelop and immolate faraway foes. Straid, always immersed in magic, never accepted an apprentice. As a result, much of his extensive knowledge is permanently lost. And then there's Homing Soul Arrow and its heavy variant, neither of which really have anything interesting to speak about, as their descriptions basically just explain what they do. Not only did he create a number of spells, but he is also connected, via Olaphis, to a pair of rings, the Dispelling Ring. A protective ring set with gemstones of 4 different colours, increases the wearer's resistance to magic, lightning, fire, and dark. A high level of artistry is required to place all 4 gemstones in one ring and draw out their power. Only the lost knowledge of the ruined land of Olaphis could have enabled the production of this ring. And there's also the Ring of Resistance. A protective ring adorned with 4 blessed gems, increases resistance to poison, bleeding, weapon breakage, and curses. A fine example of craftsmanship from the lost land of Olaphis, though the techniques required to reproduce it have since been lost to time. It is said that many lives were sacrificed in the making of this ring. Evidently, Olaphis was a land strong in magic, but it seems that very same magic contributed to its eventual downfall, which does indeed remind me a little bit of Ulasil, just ever so slightly. Who else do we know in Dark Souls 2 with powerful magic at their disposal? Why, there's Navlan, but we don't know what land and what time Navlan came from. It's possible he is from Drangleic, but as far as I'm aware it's never explicitly stated. Navlan has no interest in Straid, although he does demand Felkin's death. Felkin is another gifted magic user, talented in many arts, but Straid? Well, maybe Navlan didn't know about Straid, or maybe he knew better than to mess with him. I would say that Straid is the most powerful NPC we meet, with the possible exception of Shalquar, who is a cat and therefore basically God. Gameplay wise, Lycia might take that crown because she's crazy overpowered, but Straid's potential as a magic user was and remains immense, as does his ego. He constantly belittles and looks down on us, although in a rather friendly manner, if you ask me. A sign of his strength, in my opinion, is that he doesn't seem at all bothered at being petrified for who knows how long. Likewise, knowledge is power, and Straid knows all about the Witch of Izalith, and presumably he can utilise not only pyromancy and sorcery, but also miracles and hexes, although there's nothing to back that up. I'm just saying, if he can use sorceries and pyromancy, he can probably use miracles and hexes too. Although he doesn't seem the type to use miracles, as we know, miracles are all about your faith, and the only faith Straid seems to have is in himself. Quick review then. Straid is a wandering sorcerer, whose great power caused him to be feared even by his allies, who likely trapped him in the Bastille. It's also possible that Straid fought alongside the King of Olaphis, whoever that is, to defeat the ancient dragon. And the implications that could have concerning the Dragon Shrine are... well, you'd need a whole nother video for that. But of course, that content was cut from the game, so we shouldn't put too much into it. Even though I find that incredibly more interesting than the description of his set that we eventually got. Considering what we know of cycles, do you think it's possible that Straid was the chosen undead of his cycle? And if he wasn't, perhaps the King of Olaphis was. Or then again, maybe the Iron King is the King of Olaphis, and the Iron Keep was part of Olaphis. Who knows? Although when you consider Alkun and Ven as well, things start to become really mixed up. And how much of Straid's power could be due to his removed link with the Ancient Dragon? Remember, the Ancient Dragon gives you the Ashen Mist Heart that allows you to traverse memories. Imagine if you were a talented sorcerer, able to traverse a time forgotten, and bring back power lost from the world. Indeed, that would then lead to the possibility that Straid didn't create Flame Swathe and Lingering Flame and the like, but rather found them in the past. Of course, I think he did create them because he clearly has the power to turn souls into spells. And that gets you thinking too, doesn't it? Flame Swathe. Was that once the soul of some ancient fire demon that Straid transformed into a spell? Who knows? Compared to the great sorcerers of past games, Straid demolishes them, in my opinion. Frake and Logan, they aren't bad by any means, but it takes quite a lot for me to like a mage or a magic user, and Straid's managed it. Frake was the quintessential wise mage, whereas Logan and Straid are both more akin to Gandalf. Wait, Gandalf? No, I'm not just making weird comparisons here. Perhaps I should rephrase. They are both more akin to Odin, whom Gandalf was heavily based on. Travelling under the name Vegtam, sorry, I have no idea how to pronounce that, cloaked with a staff, he drank from the Well of Wisdom, having to sacrifice one of his eyes to do so, and that represented Odin's willingness to gain knowledge of past, present, and the future. To quote, "As he drank, he saw all the sorrows and troubles that would fall upon men and gods. He also saw why." Either way, both Logan and Straid represent that to an extent, the wandering wizard. It's an ancient and classic trope, pretty much. Although Logan became obsessed with Seath, and that ultimately led to his demise. Straid, on the other hand, despite having a potential link to another dragon, seems more obsessed with his own super-ego. And what more can I say? I just plain like Straid, and I think he's a pretty cool guy. Thank you so much for watching, and what do you think of our ancient wizard? And what about that cut description that leads to so much speculation? Is that going to be DLC, or is it just, something they decided to cut for the sake of it? Let me know in the comments. And please
Stop being so weak.